into our active learning session. The thing is, when you do research in well-being and resilience, one thing that could happen is you get some gray hair. The other thing that could happen is you're really supposed to walk your talk. And that means one part of me walking my talk was teaching a yoga class yesterday from 11 p.m. to midnight, because that was a commitment that I had over in Europe. I was like, all right, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna squat in front of my laptop and make this work somehow. It's a really awkward angle to teach yoga classes, and maybe you took some during the pandemics and you know what it looks from the other side. So it was the first one that I actually taught. And we're all gonna get up for a minute and really arrive in this room. So please humor me, stand up for a second. You thought I was joking when I said super happy you're back to be back here. Don't worry, you don't have to be able to touch your toes or anything like that. We're just gonna shake a little bit in place. So you just slightly bounce on your heels, because what this does is you kind of gets you in the present moment. Like you can't be trailing off of your thoughts somewhere over there if you're bouncing. And have you ever seen two ducks get in a fight? That's a random thing to ask, right? I'm pretty sure you have ducks here in the park. I used to see them, not here in Aldrich Park, but in some of the other parks. So after they get in a fight, when they walk away from each other, they go something like this. Imagine me having that. What this does is it resets your nervous system. And that's what the shaking and bouncing is good for. So I gave you the light version. Bouncing is the light version. If you want to go along, shake it a bit more wildly. Shake everything. And you get extra bonus points if you can take a deep inhale and then shake out your face and make a funny sound. I got you laughing. That's good too. You can try out the funny sound with the face at home. With that, welcome. You may sit down again or may stand if you like. So I was here 2 years ago to talk a little bit about breathwork studies that I had been doing. And this time when I came back, I was like, I don't just want to talk about like the latest replication and one more new study that I did. I would actually like to take a step back and say, what are the things that I've learned about doing research for a few years on this topic? And what are some of the questions that we can ask ourselves? So this talk is more about lessons learned and questions that I ask myself. And some of those questions might be useful to you as well. And I'm really interested in having a discussion about these things. So it's not a one-sided talk. I have rather few slides so we have more time to chat about it. In case, well, here's my outline, where I am, what I did, what I've learned, and why this matters to you, maybe. And I put in a very brief CV. This is what I call a one-line CV. PhD at TU Munich, then I hung out at UCI as a postdoc, then went to Long Beach State. I have an adjunct at Lappeenranta University of Technology in Finland, and now I'm at Chalmers in Gothenburg, Sweden. On the west coast of Sweden, it's basically the same as Long Beach, where I lived before. They both have the biggest harbor in the area. They both drill oil, and they're on the west coast. Yes. So research that I've been doing is mainly in the area of sustainability design and in well-being and resilience. In education, I am part of a Green Deal master's program, so software engineers going towards environmental sustainability mainly. And I've recently got involved in policy making and in a gender initiative for balance, in a European initiative for gender balance in informatics. So a lot about how do we take what we learn in research and potentially bring that into policy making. It's not so simple. I'm still learning a lot about it. It comes back to one of the questions that I have for you at the very end. This is a different type of CV. It's not exactly a CV. It's a positionality statement. Maybe for those of you who do work in HCI, this is a very familiar tool. It's called a positionality statement. It says, I was born in 81. I'm a white woman of European descent. I was born and raised in Germany. I was somewhat privileged in my education because I got to go to university, and now I'm an associate professor. I'm trained in software engineering, in sustainability, and in well-being. I've lived on 4 continents. I've visited many countries. I'm also a yoga teacher and an embodied mindfulness coach. Okay. What does the statement do? It gives you a little bit of a more rounded picture other than my academic CV. Welcome. Get some drinks, get some snacks. Reviewer 2 said this has no place in a research article because research is objective and measurable. Maria, thanks for the chuckles. I'm like, well, other disciplines think that this is important, and I've learned to consider it important because I can be very transparent about my biases, some of which I may know better than others, and about my agenda. Because really the main reason why I do research on well-being in software engineering and IT is because I want people to feel better. And it's a great excuse to make them do yoga. There we go. Full disclosure. So that's where I come from. And now let's look for a moment into what I've been doing. What have I been up to? How did this all start? Why does it matter? It started during the pandemic. There should be a picture of my mom on the slide. So during the pandemic, before I had been teaching yoga classes at the computer science department in Sweden, because when I started, the administrator said, "Hey, Birgit, I read on your CV that you're a yoga teacher. Can you teach us some yoga here?" I said, "Sure." So we had a once-a-week yoga class, and then when the pandemic started and everybody was stressed out, I was like, I don't want to do this in front of Zoom, and there's a lot of other people doing this. Maybe I can offer something different. Maybe I can offer some breathing interventions. Why exactly breathing interventions? We'll get to in a bit. But essentially, it doesn't matter whether you can touch your toes or not. We all have to breathe. So therefore, breathing interventions. And talked to my mom about it on the phone. And she said, "Oh, daughter, that's great. Are you also doing research on that now?" I'm like, "Oh, shenanigans. Wait a second. Maybe that's not the worst idea. Maybe if I do some research on it, then I could actually show some empirical data of whether this helps anything. Because there isn't a lot of stuff out there on breath. And then I got some pretty decent backup by other statistics that said 2 of 5 IT workers are in a high risk of burnout. That's pretty unfortunate. And 42% of them are considering quitting within the next 6 months. That's trouble. We also have more women than men having that high burnout risk level, and 62% overall felt emotionally and physically drained. Okay, that's definitely enough reason now to start doing something about it. That study was done by Yago, if you want to look it up online. It's not a properly peer-reviewed research study to the extent of my knowledge. They did get 30,000 answers on that survey, which I thought is a pretty good start to tell us enough about, maybe let's get moving on this. So, why the breathing? This is the one medical slide that I have, one of 2. And it shows your parasympathetic nervous system. Usually, the main player here in yellow gold is the vagus nerve. It's connected to most of your inner organs, and it is responsible for responding when you get into stressful situations. What happens then is your adrenal glands, somewhere down here, put out adrenaline into the blood circulation. At the blood-brain barrier, that changes names, it's called adrenaline after that, and it gets mapped to what is stored in the hippocampus. So the amygdala maps, is that a threat while we're under stress right now? Has that happened before? And then according to that, we have a fight, flight, or freeze response. And if you look at your typical stressful situations, due date tomorrow. By the way, I've learned to say due date, not deadline. I have an agreement with my colleagues, if nobody dies, it's not a deadline. So therefore, it's all due dates. Yay. Because I'm not a medical professional. So a bunch of due dates tomorrow. I feel really tense in my body and maybe incapable of doing anything because I'm completely overwhelmed. That would be a freeze. Or I just feel like I want to run away. That would be the flight response. Or I get really grumpy at my computer or whichever coworkers are around or at myself. That would be the fight response. Now, that's normal. We all have stressors in our lives, and if not, we would all turn into couch vegetables. So therefore, we need some stress to get us going to do something. Now, usually, we have a stressor, and then we get to relax and recover. Not with the amount of due dates that we have. So this recovery phase is often shortcut in our daily work environment now. Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy, used to say, "Oh, deadlines! I love the swooshing sound they make as they fly by." And we have a lot of them flying by these days. We have a lot of conferences, we have a lot of teaching, we have a lot of grading, we have all sorts of things that have due dates on them. So we tend to be exposed to what is called prolonged stress. That's not so healthy. It degrades the neural pathways of your fight, flight, or freeze responses. It leads to unhealthy hormone levels. It leads further then, because of the unhealthy hormone levels, to loss of memory, sleep, performance, risk of diseases, and also premature aging. None of that is really what we would like. But Birgit, you know, you're an informatics building here. Why does this matter for IT? Well, apart from, yeah, we would like to live this life healthy a little longer, it matters because I rarely have my best ideas under stress. I don't know about you. Do we make less mistakes under stress? Do we make better decisions under stress? I don't think so. And we have a couple of special forces like the Navy SEALs. They get trained to do this really well under stress. They don't get better than the normal performance. Unlikely. And I certainly don't. So that was the doomsday slide. Now we get to the good part. We can change that. There is a thing called live wiring. It used to be called neuroplasticity. But neuroplasticity is a term that people came up with for the brain being malleable, according in the same way you can form plastic, and when it hardens, then it stays, but the brain doesn't stay. We now know that it's actually live wiring because we continue to rewire our brain over the rest of our lives. And what we can use that for is we can tone the vagal nerve, this big yellow nerve that we saw running, connecting all of our organs on the last picture, and that will reduce the fight or flight response. And if we have a high vagal nerve tone, that means we'll recover more quickly. So recovery in the short run and resilience in the long run. Good. Now that we know that we can tone this, there's also a medical fine print of how this benefits all your individual organs. I'll spare you that. Instead, maybe you become curious about how do we train that vagus nerve? And the answer is super simple. We breathe. Period. We're all breathing. Otherwise, we'd be laying on the floor right now. That caveat is we usually breathe too shallow. So if right now you feel into what your lung capacity is versus what you're currently using, maybe using 10%, maybe 20, maybe 30, it's usually way less than we could. And what happens is then our energy levels go down and we don't work as effective. Another piece is we don't breathe out all the way. So we often have this old air resting in our lungs. It's not doing any harm. It takes away space from getting more energy. So if you sit up a little bit taller now, active learning part number 2, then I want you to feel out your lung capacity. Also, it doesn't help to have arms crossed because it gives you less space here. So if you sit up a little taller, take a really deep inhale. Just feel what the capacity here is, and then let it go to the side. And the third piece is, especially when we're working in front of the screen a lot, we tend to become kind of heads on a stick walking around. So if we have something to tap back into our awareness, then that is really helpful. So the solution to this is respiratory techniques. Let's try this really deep inhale for a second time, and then I would like you to sigh out loud. I know this is a bit strange, and I know I'm making you uncomfortable. You're welcome. So let's now all take a deep inhale, and then exhale with a sigh. Let it go. Good. Let's try this again. Inhale. And a third one. All German fairy tales say all good things are 3. Deep, deep inhale. The deepest one you've taken yet. And exhale with a sigh. Good. Was it a bit awkward? Maybe. What do you also notice in your body? Is there anything that comes along with these sighs?
Relaxation.
Relaxation, yes. So sighs are a physiological way to let our body know that it's safe to relax. And that's why the sighing out loud is a really good way of doing that. So the next time you walk out of a meeting, just walk down back to the office and go like, if it was a good meeting, or if it was a not so great meeting, you go, whichever flavor or intonation you want to give it is fine. If it has some voice, and if you don't want people to know, you can do it after you're back in your office. Giving it that audible sigh will help your nervous system to relax and to let go of what was. Same as the shaking thing. Now, if you do both together, you're going to walk into your next task absolutely refreshed and ready for it. How did I use that in research? So we had a breathing intervention, a similar breathing technique that used a physiological sigh, which was an inhale into the belly, inhale into the chest, and then an exhale. And you do that for a number of minutes, and it has a very deeply relaxing and restoring effect on the nervous system. That's what I started doing with people during the pandemic. We had a session per week, and we did that over 12 weeks in a number of applications. We were curious to see what our participants' shifts in mindful attention awareness, in personal well-being, both in how much positivity and negativity they perceive in their lives, in terms of psychological well-being and positive thinking. We also looked at perceived productivity, self-efficacy, how well can they deal with economic challenges, and their daily perceptions on life, and finally, how well did they engage with the entire intervention. We collected data in surveys. We had an entry and an exit survey to measure what was the difference over time, and a very short weekly well-being survey where they rated how well they were doing that week. And we asked them to journal every day a little bit. We did an exit interview. So we had plenty of data to go off of. And this was all the results squeezed into one tiny table because it's not the main point of the talk. So we found some support for the mindful attention awareness. What was really interesting was people's ratings sometimes went down because they also realized how often they were usually zoning out and not paying attention. And we did find support for the well-being. Perceived productivity was a bit inconclusive, and we're not sure how much that is due to the pandemic circumstances and how much that there is simply no strong correlation between certain well-being practices and productivity. To this day, I still see it more as a side effect. So I don't have people take care of themselves well so they are more productive than I ask them to do well-being practices so they are in a better place and are therefore more likely to stay. So it's more about retention and keeping people in a good place. Self-efficacy went up, and then we had some diverse examples of how people engaged with the interaction. We also had a pretty high number of dropouts. Number one reason was, I'm too busy for this right now. I know it would do me really well, which is unfortunate. These were the lovely people who helped me with the research. My PhD student, Christy, Rickard, who's a wizard in statistics, and then Julia, Letizia, and Francisco. Not today's talk. Yes, Andre.
Just when I was going to ask a question, but that's not today's talk.
Well,
when you say people, though, were those
yes.
developers or anybody at
yes.
the university, or who was your audience?
Yes, I set out to recruit software developers. I didn't get enough, so I opened it up further. And what that meant was I also included a bunch of my research colleagues and some other people from the personal network. What they all had in common is we were able to classify them as knowledge workers or computer workers. So not everybody was a software engineer. They all worked in front of a screen for more than 70% of the time and had something to do with knowledge management.
And then the follow-up question is, out of the people who dropped out, which group were they? Were they the software developers or were they the researchers?
Across the board.
Across the board. Okay.
Yeah. People got busy, people had other things in their lives, whether it's like for some it was maybe a family thing, like the intervention happens to be in those couple of hours that I actually have time with my partner and kids. For another one, it was too many due dates, too much stress at work, so diversified. Okay, you're welcome. So further details, I'm happy to answer questions on that. And that was part of what I talked about 2 years ago, when we didn't have the third replication analyzed yet. The third replication pretty much confirmed the results that we had until then. Instead, I would like to take a minute to talk to you about the new pilot study, or two new pilot studies that I've run and am running. One was in a course called Digitalization for Sustainability. This is a summer school. Gothenburg University has an international summer school, and they asked each school to teach one course in it. And I got an email one day from my dean saying, "Hey Birgit, we promised to teach a course on sustainability last year and we kind of forgot about it. Can you teach it? Here's the title, you can do whatever you want with it." I said, okay, that's great. So what I did in that course, where I have students from all levels, from first year bachelor's to the end of their master's degree, and across all different subjects, so they're not necessarily IT students. I get them for 5 weeks, and we have sessions to mornings per week. I had them look a little bit into what sustainability meant to them and how that could be supported by IT. So a little bit of meaning to our IT course. And then I added a well-being component and had them pick a mode that they wanted to practice. And I suggested that is something that they not already do. So they could pick in between yoga asana, meditation, breathing, and walks. Sorry, yoga asana is the yoga poses. Could be walks in nature, could be some breathing practices, or a form of meditation. And then I had them do reflective journaling throughout the course. I also did something really esoteric, which is, it's not really esoteric, it's considered esoteric by some people, a GDP measurement. So GDP stands for gas discharge visualization, and it is a device that runs a very low electricity across the fingerprint and then infers the biofield of the body. People in esoteric communities call it an aura. People in quantum physics call it the biofield. We can measure it now. And I got one of these devices, and it was really fun to try it out with the students. It is also very much a moment-by-moment measurement, so it wasn't very useful for detecting changes that had occurred over only 5 weeks. So I think for doing a solid GDP study, I would have had them for a year to continue measurements with them. And then in the survey instruments, we added resilience this time. The main results were the students are excited about everything. The measurements were somewhat semi-significant. We found it really difficult to say, we have students coming in from all over the world to this one city, a bunch of new people, a lot of different input, a lot of really exciting social events, and we're trying to measure that well-being practice that we have them do 15 minutes a day. So we're not exactly sure if we have enough control over the context to be able to say something about those results. So we did have positive outcomes, the students all loved it, and I'm not sure how much was due to what. That's really hard to quantify, and that shows up in the questions as well. That's it. The course always gets rated really highly, and I'm teaching it again next year. If you have any undergraduates that you want to send. That brings us to what have I learned so far? So some of the lessons learned are, I get about 20% completion rate if I have random signups. If I can do it within a frame that already exists, like a course, it might be higher. If I pick people off the internet, through my networks, through word of mouth, then I ended up at about 20%, which is not so great because it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of time and effort that goes into this. So in each of those 3 rounds where I did the replication of breathwork studies, I had about 100 signups and about 20 people who completed all the data collection with me. What I also learned is, I get asked by reviewers a lot, what about the control groups? I like having volunteers sign up for doing nothing but answering surveys. So that's a difficult one. I don't get enough volunteers for doing that. I'm not the only researcher that has had trouble with that, so I looked into literature, how do others do that? And in mindfulness-based interventions, I have found the so-called waitlist approach. However, the waitlist approach also introduces some new interference, because then the people are already kind of primed for the thing, and then what happens, because, sorry, I should explain what the waitlist approach is. So if I run a study for 12 weeks to say you're going to come do breathwork with me once a week, oh, this course is full, but you can sign up for the one in 12 weeks and also fill out our surveys on the way, so you already know about where your well-being stands. That is called a waitlist approach, and it's fairly common in some of the clinical areas that I've researched on that. It does introduce a different kind of interference. The other thing that I got asked about was, why do people get to pick the intervention? Shouldn't you be randomly assigning whether they do meditation or asana or nature walks? I said, yeah, maybe. I also wanted to do the thing. So if I make them do something that they're not really interested in, they're more likely to drop out. And the other option would be, I could pay them a significant amount of money of doing that. I yet have to find the funding for that. So that has not been an option for me. Another really interesting thing is, okay, these people have improved their well-being while they hung out with you over those 12 weeks. That's great. Yeah, they had accountability, they were doing something together every week. Is that going to make a difference long term? Who of you is participating in a long-term study of any kind? I'm not in many. I can count one right now. I was in a workshop with CRAW a decade ago. By now, they still send me their surveys, and I'm like, I know how freaking hard it is. I'm gonna reply again. So long-term studies, they need a high amount of commitment by the participants. And if I already have a drop of 100 to 20 because it didn't hurt so bad anymore, or because priorities were more urgent somewhere else, then in long-term studies, that's even worse. So I've tried to do a follow-up. It completely fizzled out. I don't get enough replies to continue that. And you know, it's okay. If I ask myself why, like, why do I have not enough people signing up for the waitlist thing? Why do people drop off in the first place while they get busy by something else? Why can medical research do a full randomized controlled trial and I cannot? Oh, people are not enough pain. That's why. So what happens for the medical studies is usually people get a diagnosis and it hurts so bad that they really, really want to do something about it. With well-being interventions, my experience after being a yoga teacher for 8 years is people come and then they do it for a while until they feel better. And then after that, they may stay or may drop off. So that's why we have a bit more of a difficulty in the continuity here. By the way, it feels like I'm pulling down my pants in this talk. I'm like, here's all the things that are wrong with my research. You're welcome. So we can talk about it and see what we can learn from it. For the survey, there is no good time for asking people to fill out a weekly survey. It's like, try to do it at the beginning of the week when they have a million other things on their platform. Try to do it right after the intervention, then you're biasing it because now they feel good for a minute. Try to do it at the end of the week and they're hopefully running off into a happy weekend. So we haven't found the perfect timing then. And another question it's on the lesson slide, but it's really a question. When do I continue to replicate with my survey instruments, and when do I change so I can hopefully learn something new? Because I want to keep my survey length at not too long. Anything over 10 minutes is painful, and people are going to drop out. So what are the most relevant things that I want to measure, and when do I feel I have enough saturation here so that I say, okay, that one we take as a given now, let's move on to the next thing. Maybe now we are more interested in resilience and intelligence. The journaling was brought up a number of times to me. So I have people do reflective journaling every day, even if just for a few lines. Say, hey, how was your day? How are you feeling? Anything stand out? It gives great qualitative data. And then reviewer 2 asked me, well, like, what are you evaluating? Are you evaluating the actual well-being intervention? Are you evaluating, like, how much does the reflective journaling do in there? I don't know, I can't pull it apart. Like, it has this double function of, it serves as an additional means to let things sink in and let people see in their own written words what kind of difference this practice makes for them. and it serves as qualitative data. So there is a bit of a interference here. And last, the exit interviews. Who does the exit interviews? If I do the exit interviews after an intervention that I've administered, there's a bias in there. It's like doing an exit interview for a course with the professor who gave the course. You're gonna probably give different answers than if either the TA does it or somebody who you've never seen before. So that could introduce a positivity bias. At the same time, so what I did in round 1 of the breathwork studies was I did the exit interviews. Round 2, I had a master's student do it who was not affiliated with the stuff at all. Worst results ever. How much of that is due because of lack of background knowledge, and how much of that is due because the person wasn't as committed is on a different page. But I have not made the best experiences with having an interviewer who is completely out of context of the project. And then in the third round, I had my PhD student do the interviews, and that was kind of a bit of a middle ground. She has a psychology background, and she is familiar with the interventions themselves. She didn't have a personal relationship with any of the participants, which I had kind of built over the course of the 12 weeks. So, pick your bias, and then make it transparent which one it was when you report on these studies. Where do we go from here? Well, I've started a new thing before we get to the questions. One that I'm currently running, where I've done my best to incorporate some of those lessons learned, is the intervention where I taught last night. So I teach a 9-week, because that's all the time that we had up to Christmas, intervention with a nearby software engineering company called Sanskrit in Gothenburg. And I usually come to their office and teach yoga in person. We also did polyg yoga classes because we didn't want to have people have a preconception about it. I told them in the advertisement for this, yeah, I'm probably going to make you do funny things with your body. And really, it's an excuse for me to talk to you about some psychological concepts and how we can manage better when there's a lot of stress coming up in our daily life. I know right now there's yoga pictures up there. We don't necessarily go that deep into part of the process. What we do, 9 weekly sessions, they do have a physical and a psychological component because both are relevant to our well-being. And I told them at the start, the commitment to yourself matters most in this because I want to avoid the 80% drop-off towards the end of the study. So these people all signed up with the best intentions. So how can I keep them motivated to keep going? How can I show them that this really makes a difference for them? I told them the commitment to yourself to do this entire series is also really important. And fine print, and then I also get valid research data out of that, which is the agreement that we have for this intervention. Hybrid attendance is okay. Fine print, because the person who's administering the thing also has to do a few sessions remotely because of travels. And we collect the data both for their own feedback as well as for the research that will be an anonymous analysis. I had almost 40 signups. I had 30 plus in the first session, 29 answers to the entry survey, and last night I still had almost 30 people in the session. So it's going well so far, and I can report on whatever comes up next when I come back.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what do you mention mean by resilience in the context
Yes.
of this?
So resilience means coming back quicker from being stressed. So we can, like, in the short term, it will be more the recovery, and then if I look at recovery over the long run, it's resilience. And I've added resilience because I've noticed when I only talk about well-being, that people sometimes think about candle lights and bubble baths and playing around in yoga class, where it's really more about becoming resilient so we can respond better to normal daily stressors. And there's a couple of dedicated survey instruments for that, the resilience scale, which pretty much asks about how comfortable you feel when a lot of sudden changes happen in your environment. How this relates to you? Here's my slide with the questions. So I have a couple of questions to ask myself, and then a couple more questions for you. But I'm still learning about how to increase completion. Of course, I do the best that I can in the actual intervention, your service, to help people. And as I mentioned earlier, clinical studies can happen because people have a diagnosis, they're actually in pain, and therefore they are willing to stick with whatever needs to be done as a therapy. And that's not quite as strong in what I do because it's more preventative. How do I study this long term? Can we find any incentives to keep people around for long-term studies? It's a difficult one. Do you know there's one long-term study done by Harvard about happiness? It gets quoted a lot, and it says things like people who are in long-term committed partnerships are the happiest, and it makes a couple of other statements about general happiness in life. And the researchers are super proud that they ran the study over the course of 70 years, which, yes, is a very impressive long-term study. I've known about the study for a decade. What I learned last year was only male participants. So there's an ever so slight bias in there. And I'm still wondering, and I haven't found out yet, what was their incentive to keep people answering for 70 years, which is really great. Yeah, so more to be learned there. And happy to hear what you might know about incentives. How do I control the variables? The pandemic was one thing. The special circumstances of this international summer school are a different one. How much can I account for these? How much can I just make them known and say, okay, this is what we have? Because I can't stick people in a lab and say, we're going to do yoga for 4 weeks and you're not leaving. Not exactly the point. And what could be other helpful mechanisms to collect qualitative data? A lot of people get tired from journaling, and scheduling an interview is another step that maybe not all people are willing to incorporate into their workday. I thought also about running discussion channels, something like a Slack channel or WhatsApp group or something along those lines. And there's often downsides to each of those. You might try one of them in the future. And then for the survey instruments, oh, I showed up twice. That was supposed to just go on the slide. Now I know why there's a question on there because I moved it and forgot to delete it on the first one. So there is no perfect time to do a weekly rating. So when is maybe the best time, and when do I replicate a survey, and when do I maybe change some of the instruments? And last but not least, questions that you might be interested in asking yourself. And this is more leaning back even further from the details in this talk to say, what is my mission? Like, this is the thing that I sat myself down for when I started in Sweden. Okay, what's my mission now? I'm starting from scratch at a new institution. Of course, I still have my previous research context and collaborations. And is there like a new important thing? How do I make an impact with that thing? Which method might be most useful for helping me in that? For me, it's been doing the actual interventions. We've also run an interview study and then on well-being, and then done some analysis of where people's perception is currently at in practice. A little bit similar to the work that Ivtegar and Andre have been presenting at PI last year. And I'm sure there's more that I could do in that area. For me personally, it's turned out that the interventions are where I feel I can make a difference. Not only by having like a little published study, but also by word of mouth of the people who participated in these things. Because as a software engineering professor, I have access to populations that might not necessarily go out by themselves and seek a well-being training of any sorts. But they might be willing to listen to me for it. And then which outlets and channels are the most useful for research, for education, and policy for what happens there. That's what I have for you today. Here's a couple of resources if you would like to follow up on any of these things. I gave a TEDx talk in Gothenburg in April last year about the connection between well-being and sustainability in IT. There is some work on the sustainability awareness framework, the very early phases that were started here, and then take it further, and here's a couple of links on the well-being stuff. Down here is a long list of collaborators that I've contributed to this work. You might know a couple of them, but we're still here as faculty. And now I'm super curious to hear more questions.
Thanks, really cool research. Hard to do, hard to get people to listen to these kinds of messages. So here's a theory about dropout and just people staying in. A lot of people are addicted to pain in their day-to-day life. And I've observed so many software developers being so proud that they got through a really terrible crunch, a stressful time, and that's what makes them proud about their job versus being calm, collected, and focused going through it. So I wonder if there's some resistance because people they just like their pain.
Yes, that is actually true. There is psychological research that shows that we are addicted to our pain. As humans, we are addicted to our pain. We can see that in everyday conversations where we very much like to complain about things and commiserate and not change anything about it. So that is another indicator for that being true. Yes. So it's often an unconscious thing that goes somewhere underneath, and there's definitely research evidence for that being the case. Yeah.
Just one quick follow-up. I've seen people drop out of yoga when they start to feel too good
Yes.
in their bodies and in their self-awareness. It's a kind of a scary thing to individuals.
Yeah, there is a piece around that. So another aspect of it is I linked it to my experience with physiotherapy. I have a couple of friends who are physiotherapists, and I also know in my own experience from a couple of injuries over the course of my life, yeah, I'm very diligent to do my exercise the first 4 weeks, and then it gets better, and then I slack off very quickly. So, of course, these exercises are not necessarily designed to be done forever, and more continuity would certainly be good. And yes, I've seen that in yoga classes that when we get to a certain level of feeling good, there's something weird that happens. All of a sudden, other things are more important and we get distracted. It's an interesting one. Thank you.
In your studies, have you gotten any insight into where some of the less well-being, the poor well-being is coming from? Is it, so in the participants, is it more home related? Is it more friends social related? Is it more the state of the world related? Is it more work related?
We've seen that it's mostly work related, and I am not sure that that is always the full truth of it. I have a sense that since work is a place that we either go to or spend this in that many hours per day, we might not be so aware of how the state of the world is impacting ourselves. There is an underlying tension that people already feel, and then the other things get layered on top of that. So if now I have a teenager at home who's acting out, okay, that can stress me out. And when I then go to work and then have 10 emails about very urgent due dates dropping in, then that might just be what lets everything overflow and get too much. So while we've seen that a lot of it seems to be work related, I'm not sure that is actually necessarily the case, and that maybe people don't always have the perception of where the layering comes from. Have you found something different in your studies?
No, I'm asking for an answer. Right. It's I don't have a good hypothesis yet in that space. So I was just curious whether you were aware of anybody who was really trying to tease that apart or not.
I think it might be cool to look into psychology for that. I think that would they would most likely have an answer of some sorts, and I've not done a search for it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
How can you measure the effectiveness of the intervention?
Yeah, so the effectiveness of the intervention is a very good question that touches on some of the interferences that I've brought up, like how much to measure the actual intervention versus then writing a diary about it and being in a certain context with a certain group. For some people, it's also a really relieving thing to simply be with a group of people who start feeling familiar over a couple of weeks. So there's a certain group dynamics aspect that also gets featured into it. So when you say, how do I measure the effectiveness? It's mostly self-reported. So I can't put any measurements on them. There are certain things that we could check, like what is, for example, the heart rate variability at the beginning of the course and at the end of the course, which is how much your heart rate tends to vary over the day. And the higher the variability, that's a difficult word for a German, the better your long-term health is supposed to be. And we've not done any physical measurements because people were spread out all over and we were only interacting online. And also requires more intervention and more measurement and more doing additional things. So far we've done it all based on self-reported surveys and on the interview. And then I asked them in the interview specifically, does it feel like that particular technique brought any well-being benefits, any physical health benefits, any mental health benefits? So the self-reported thing does also introduce that bias of, okay, how well do people understand how they're influenced by a certain thing versus another? Not sure I answered the question completely. Feel free to ask a follow-up question.
Oh, I just want to ask another question to a yoga instructor. What's your favorite yoga routine? So I want to do it because I'm a big fan of yoga as well. Yeah.
Okay. There is a sequence that I really like to do in the evening, which is called moon salutations. So the sun salutations are very out there and many people know about them. They're like an activating sequence for the morning. Moon salutations are not as well known. They're a nice sequence to lengthen everything and they don't bring your energy up as high as the sun salutations. So they're really great to relax in the evening. I really like that one. And I have a bunch of YouTube videos out there. One of them also has the moon salutation if you want to look at it. Thank you. Yes, Jim.
So the wonderful. So you have surveys, for example, interviews you had mentioned, and so presumably you're asking questions directed towards certain goals or or aspects that you want to measure, right? So well-being and other things like this. This is kind of like a two-part question, like interference. You mentioned, don't you think that in a way by asking particular about maybe some potential goals, like how are you doing in terms of time management? How are you doing in terms of your calm? How are you doing in terms of your interpersonal? I don't know what the questions are, but whatever you ask, they're going to get them repeated. Don't you think that brings some mindfulness to those things that might actually be part of the solution? Like perhaps the measurement itself as an interference, because you're asking specific questions, actually serves as actually part of the goal itself. I mean, so it would question in one way, maybe, is it a good measurement? But in a way also, it's no, who cares? It's actually being part of the study is actually good because perhaps it brings your attention to the things that maybe we should be thinking about as people.
Yes, I think that's a good observation. So for the instruments that we used, for the one study, I pulled up with the instruments more in detail, and for that, it was only an entry-exit survey. So the long one that was talking about where are you during the day, and I remember one of the questions was, rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 5. I forget a person's name immediately after they introduce themselves. That is one of, I think, 10 or 15 statements. And for that one, we actually saw a decrease over time. So people now noticed also when am I not aware. But they get these questions once at the beginning of the 12 weeks and once at the end of the 12 weeks. So they don't have a continuing primer. So I'm not sure whether it's strong enough for that. However, it could be included. And I actually did something in addition that I didn't speak about here. In addition to the breath work, we also had a 15-minute talk part where we talk about one topic, for example, time management. How you deal with that and what are tools for that. And yes, it was a bit of additional education. And yes, I also got the question of how much that influences the results. And it was pretty much the time that I needed people to wind down when they came at the beginning. Because everybody comes from somewhere, and at the beginning, they're all still somewhere else in their thoughts. So how do I get them centered, even though they're just sitting in front of the computer? So I like the idea of including that maybe as an explicit primer. And say, we're going to ask you about that every week. Maybe that's going to help you bring attention to it.
You're confused on the reporting of it, and then you say how you can measure effectiveness.
Yes, it gets really convoluted there. What's the other part of the question?
No, that's it. Yeah. Do you think that there's interference and then secondarily, is the interference potentially actually beneficial?
Yeah, so I think in this case, because we asked once at the start and once at the end of that survey, maybe there was not so much interference. If we had asked more frequently, the stuff that we asked throughout the weeks there, yes, I think so, and I think it's a positive one, yeah. And it would be interesting to understand how to measure that positive impact of it. I don't know how to do that. Thank you.
I actually have some thoughts about the participants. You mentioned like people start drop out maybe after a few sessions, like 80% of them. From my perspective, I think they drop out probably they lack of motivation, probably because like this activity is not important enough for them, right? So have you ever thought about instead of recruiting people who never had yoga experience before, maybe include some like developers, they already like doing yoga for a while. Then instead of like motivating them doing yoga with you, maybe ask them why they decide to do yoga or other like workout at the beginning. Because for me, like maybe like 2 years ago, I didn't do workout very much because the accessibility problem, because I need to like took like 10 minutes bus to get to the gym. Then I was like, okay, I'm just like being lazy, I just stay at home. But after I came to Irvine, like my home is like 5 minutes walk to gym. Then since that, I did a lot of workouts, especially like beginning of this quarter, I did even more because after I read some like my health data, for example, my cardio fitness that I observed is like far below average. That I got the motivation, like I want to increase it. Then I start to read a lot of like data, and I did a lot of like research online to watch like YouTube video or read article about it, like how to improve the cardio fitness. I think I try really hard like for the past 3 months. Now it's just like below average. Before it's like low, so I can see the improvement, and I think it makes me really happy, and I got more motivated. So yeah, so my thought is like instead of like pushing people to do something, maybe ask people who already doing those kind of activities, find out okay what motivates you to change your daily routine. Then maybe we can motivate other people who haven't do those kind of self-care stuff more.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I think it is turning motivation into a habit as soon as we can. And yes, we lose people along the way. And yeah, people can drop off because of other priorities, because in the end it is. And I'm making this more a priority than something else that would otherwise take that time. So I understand every single dropout that I've had. They tell me their reason, and I'm like, yeah, okay. And in the end, that reason is just, here's why the priority list has shifted, and everybody gets to make that choice. I think that's a piece that maybe we sometimes forget. As Germans, especially, we're very good at saying, I have to, I have to, I have to. We always talk about muss, and in English, we're very good about shooting ourselves about all sorts of things. And so if we can instead remember that all of those are choices, even that saying of nothing's for granted except death and taxes. You don't even have to file your taxes if you're willing to bear the consequences. And so if we can remember that all of these are choices that we are making, then we can feel more empowered about it. So what I've seen, a lot of people who dropped out, they didn't feel that agency. They felt like this other thing had a priority that they had to shoulder. That was one perception of it. I think I'm deviating a bit from your question. So it is a big motivation thing. And in my current study with Sensec, there is a mix of people who already do and like yoga and people who are fairly new to it. So I have a mix in that group, and I will make sure to ask them about that. That's a good idea. Like, what has made you really stick with that practice? The ones that I've spoken to up to now, they usually say, well, I feel the benefits in my body. I feel better. Thank you.
Thank you. Sort of a follow-on question on that. I know you're totally to be done. No, a real quick one. So in some ways, sort of thinking about the whole well-being thing, going back to work versus, home stresses. In some ways, yoga and sort of all the other things are external interventions, right? They're meant to make, in some ways, resilience, right? To make you weather the storm better. But it's not about actually fundamentally tackling the source of it, which is sitting at work, right? And I think that's a piece that's contributing, I think, to the dropouts, right? It's like that is there, it remains there. I feel a little bit better, I can handle it, and then slowly but surely I can't anymore, right? So in some ways, you also want to think about the interventions at work itself, right? Do we need to reconfigure work so that it is more conducive to my well-being?
Yes. When Birgit takes over the world, that's exactly what we're going to do. Because the last
Sweet. All right. Sign me up.
responsible for organizational and cultural change, because you're right. Like, this is the technique to better deal.
Yeah.
It doesn't change the original source of why we get stressed in the first place. So I can say, okay, I'm still going to measure the intervention because there will always be stressors in our lives. I can't say it's going to fix everything. Like, we definitely also get to take a good look at ourselves. And I've noticed that after the pandemic, like, we ramped it up slowly. We were like, we're so much better now. We've learned all the lessons. If I look at our street now, I feel that we're in overdrive mode. Like, the pendulum swung to the other side, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Or for me, in my perception right now, that's not a good thing. So the question is, have we learned anything?
Yeah, and the interesting thing from my perspective is not only has the pendulum swung, but people have been angry about it and reacting that back off at work in some ways.
Yes.
It's been interesting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So we are out of time. Let us thank the speaker for the excellent talk and making us jump for a few seconds.